Today we're going to be talking about a man who went from being a high school dropout to a multinational businessman, making an estimated $60 million every single day. The king of cocaine himself, Pablo Escobar.
Les voy a decir quién soy. Yo soy Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria.
I first learned about Escobar through the Netflix series called Narcos, which is an absolutely phenomenal show. If you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend you check it out. Probably don't want your kids being there, though. Just a little heads up. Definitely check it out, though. But it just absolutely blew my mind how one man selling drugs could literally control an entire nation. But this was all from a TV show. Everything's exaggerated for entertainment purposes, which is fair. So I had to know, was he actually this powerful? So I did the only thing I knew to do. We took it to the internet, done a bunch of research, and now we're going to talk about it. Pablo was born December 1st, 1949. His father was a farmer, his mother was a school teacher, and he was the third oldest of 7 children. Now, while Pablo wasn't exactly in extreme poverty, as you can imagine, by the time you take care of and feed 7 children, there wasn't exactly a lot of money left over. Pablo's education was almost as wild as he was. Pablo ended up dropping out of high school just before his 17th birthday, returned 2 years later with his cousin Gustavo, and then dropped out again. However, Pablo really wanted a good education, so he did what any sane person would do. He forged a high school diploma and went to university. Yeah. But even with that, with the lack of money, Pablo would not be able to finish college. Now, for the meat and potatoes of the conversation, what we all know Pablo for, his crimes. Pablo would start his criminal career just like any other criminal, by stealing tombstones. Oh boy. Oh boy. Not literally. He would steal tombstones, sandblast the inscription off of them, and then resell them. That's how our boy Pablo got started in the criminal empire. It's crazy to think that someone who's stealing tombstones and reselling them would eventually go on to become the king of cocaine. And then Pablo decided to start stealing from the living by stealing their cars. Then he graduated to kidnapping. So he would kidnap people, hold them for ransom, then they would send him the money or whatever he requested, and then naturally you would suspect him to turn that person back over after receiving the ransom. Just to give you an idea of how brutal Pablo was, there was times that he would receive the ransom for the people they had kidnapped. He would tear up the notes, keep the money, and still unalive the person. Not only was Pablo a criminal, he was a cold-blooded killer. Then came the cocaine boom. In the 1970s, cocaine became a really big profit for our cartels and smugglers. And all they had to do was use their same old smuggling routes that they used to smuggle cigarettes, TVs, stereos, and everything, and instead they just turned the supply to cocaine, and no one would be any the wiser. And naturally, Pablo got on board. He wasn't going to miss the opportunity to make this kind of money. However, when smuggling from Ecuador, Pablo would get arrested for the first time by the DAS, or the Colombia's version of the FBI. The DAS actually searched one of the spare tires to the truck and found 39 kilos of coke, and his hind end went to jail. Now, this is where things get wild. Pablo actually won a lawsuit and was able to get the first judge off the trial. He bribed the second judge and was able to get him and his gang out of jail. And then they went and hunted down the agents who arrested them and had them assassinated. Imagine that. Now, this would become normal operations for Pablo and his cartel. Silver or lead.
Plata o plomo.
Eventually, the cocaine market in the United States exploded. People couldn't stay away from this stuff, and the demand skyrocketed. And Pablo and his cartel seized the moment. He got together with other drug kingpins and smugglers and developed routes that went all the way to the Bahamas. That way they would have easy access to Florida. They went as far as having planes, airstrips at the Bahamas. They had refrigerated housing to store the cocaine. They had hotels, entertainment, the whole nine. They were making money hand over fist. They would smuggle the cocaine in and the money out. Now, I hate to give someone like Pablo any credit, but there was a little bit of good in his heart. You see, Pablo had a soft spot for the poor. I mean, he grew up poor, he was around poor people, and he felt the need to help them. And at the height of his power, when he was making the most money, he built the poor, low-income housing, churches, hospitals, soccer fields. He truly cared about them, and they cared about him. They even went as far as to refer to him as the Robin Hood. As a matter of fact, they liked him so much that he ended up running as an alternate for Congress and won. A drug trafficker really got into Congress. However, on the first day of Congress, they met. The new Minister of Justice called out Pablo for his criminal activity. Shortly after, Liberal leader Gallon expelled Pablo from Congress. I'll give you 5 seconds to guess what happened to the new Minister of Justice just 3 months later. That's right. He was murdered. Gee, I wonder who that could have been. And from this moment on, it gets even more interesting. You see, Colombia and the United States were working on extradition. So they would be able to take someone, let's say Pablo, arrest him in Colombia, bring him to the United States to face justice, and spend time in an American jail. And if there's one thing that Pablo didn't want, it was an American jail cell. He went as far as to say, better a grave in Colombia than a cell in the United States. And Pablo and his cartel would do anything to prevent an extradition treaty with Colombia and the United States. Pablo and his cartel had countless judges murdered, and even at one point had a siege of the Palace of Justice where all the evidence against Pablo was stored. And as you could imagine, all of that evidence was destroyed, and during the siege, a total of 98 people would lose their lives. And with this, he would eventually win another short victory with no extradition. That is, until the new president, Vargas, would renew the extradition treaty with the United States. Now, during this time, Escobar didn't forget that Gallon was the one that kicked him out of politics. And on August 18th, 1989, via Pablo's orders, Gallon was assassinated. And he even tried to assassinate Gallon's successor by planting a bomb on an airplane. Just so happened that his successor actually missed the flight, but all 107 passengers were killed. And with 2 Americans killed in the bombing, the U.S. started to intervene directly. Now with this, things heated up. It was like a full-blown war. Bodies were stacking up. And at the end of all of this, it was like thousands of police officers were killed. Pablo and his cartel had car bombs everywhere. Colombia was just in ruin. And with that, eventually Pablo was able to make a deal with the Colombian government. This is probably one of the wildest parts of all of this. He would be able to just plead guilty to a couple of charges and turn himself in. And Colombia would forgive him of anything else in the past, as long as all these killings stopped and he turned himself in. They would forgive him. The catch here is he got to build his very own prison. He decided who the guards were going to be. He decided who his fellow inmates were going to be. And the Colombian government, police, military, wasn't allowed anywhere near his self-built prison. And when I say prison, I mean he had his own private bedroom with like a huge stack of American money. They had jacuzzis, soccer fields. They even brought in entertainment, and half the time it was rumored that Pablo wasn't even in the jail. They would sneak him out so he can continue to run his business. And with that, U.S. intelligence was constantly going to the Colombian government to let them know, like, hey, he's not in jail. He's not being punished. He's still running his cocaine business. He's not even in the jail half the time. He's out here running around, striking deals. And when he is in there, it's just to sleep and hang out with the boys. And with that, eventually the Colombian government was like, okay, we have to do something. This isn't working out. He's not actually in jail. So they strike up an idea. They send some military over there to actually take custody of him and move him to an actual Colombian jail. Before they was actually able to go in there and get him, Pablo was tipped off and he escaped. And for the rest of his life, Pablo would be on the run. You see, it wasn't just Pablo versus the police anymore. He had the police after him. He had the Colombian government. He had U.S. intelligence. He had U.S. DEA agents. He had there was a group of people who Pablo had affected in a negative way who had come together and were also going after Escobar. And on top of that, rival cartels also wanted him to go down because then they could take over his areas and make more money. So as you can see now, the deck's stacked completely against him. He just has him and a few loyal followers left versus rival cartels, governments. Things are closing in very quickly. And one day after Pablo Escobar's 44th birthday, the U.S. intelligence was able to trace a phone call that Pablo had placed to his son and notified Colombia of his exact location. Special Forces operators went here, they seen Pablo in the window, and it was on. Pablo held true to his word. Better a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. There was a short gunfight, and Pablo was killed on the roof of the building he was found in, marking an end to Pablo's reign of terror. Now, something I would love to add to this was, at the height of his power, when he had all this money, he actually built this hacienda. He had this huge mansion. It had a zoo, all kinds of entertainment. And in that zoo, there was actually 4 hippos, which is commonly referred to as the cocaine hippos as of today. It started off with 4. I think there's like an estimated 200 to 300 now. And they're actually going as far as to having to go out and hunt them because they're becoming so destructive on the land. So one could say that, Pablo is still just raising hell in Colombia. Now, to answer the question of when I first started, was Pablo actually that powerful? Yeah, it sure the heck looks that way. It just absolutely blows my mind that this guy could build his own prison. He was able to nearly cripple a country. He even went as far at one point, just to end it all, to say, hey, I'll pay off all the national debt if you'll just leave me alone. Right? That's the kind of money this guy had. When you have that much money and power to where you can crack a deal with your federal government to build your own prison and do your own thing, boys, I am Cheap. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and all that good jazz. We'll catch you in the next one.